So that's kind of one of my passions, and happy to kind of chat about some of the experiences that I've had and that we've had at Guelph. So for many of these talks, I do start with a little bit of self-disclosure just around my own mental health experience, which I, didn't do for years. So, I was one of those students that studied really hard and got those grades to get into clinical psych and loved psychology. And once I got into clinical psych, certainly in my training, um, it was always about the other. It was a very medical model. Let's learn about different kinds of mental illness that others experience. Meanwhile, knowing, that many of us had our own sort of walk through that in life. And that was kind of not well integrated into my training. And it's really only been after that that I've come to understand more about my own journey and how it influenced the choices I've made and the person that I am, for good and ill. But certainly in my very first year of university, I had a pretty severe episode of depression. In fact, I missed a couple weeks of the first semester back. I was having some panic attacks and was very low. And thankfully was able to get some support at home, but really there wasn't much support for me on campus. And I still don't really know how I got through that first year. It's a bit of a fog, but I did, and recovered. And then, there've been other times in my life. I know I have that vulnerability, and there've been other times where that's flared up. And different things have helped at different times. So, as I went into training in clinical psychology and had my own clients and was doing research in these areas, I've come to see that it's a gift, like some of the experiences that I have had in terms of understanding. Of course, we all come from different experiences. And in many ways, I come from a very privileged experience, although not fully, but in lots of ways. So I think what I've been committed to doing is using that privilege to continue to advocate for ways. Oh, sorry, getting a notification there. Advocate for ways that we can continue to better support mental health on campus. Sorry, that was very long-winded. Please don't feel you need to match my my length. But again, since we're a smaller group, I just wouldn't mind kind of hearing who's out there in this online world. I don't know, Julian, if you want to, I don't know how you like, because everyone sees people in a different order, but maybe if you want, lots of the people. So if you want to organize that, I just wouldn't mind getting a check-in and hearing from people.
Sure, no problem. So as announced in the package, we are being recorded. If you do want to remain anonymous, you absolutely can by turning off your camera. And if you want to change your display name, now that you're in, you're absolutely welcome to do so. I do invite you to participate in, sharing information about you though. So a way to do that is if you want to do so via mic, go ahead and raise your hand and we'll go in order that way. If not, I welcome you to use the chat and we'll be able to read about each other and see who's around there as well. So whichever one you prefer, we'd love to get to know you either way. So raising your hand or chat, either one is good. I see Sarah is down to participate. So Sarah, if you want to go ahead, unmute yourself. We can start with you.
I'm Sarah. I have a BA in psychology from McGill, and I'm studying to be an Anglican priest at McGill. And so mental health is just really important to me and important to me in my career. And like, let's be honest, most religious professionals kind of suck at it. And I'd like to not suck at it.
Welcome, Sarah. Thank you so much. Looking over to the chat. You can take a second there. Whoops. I got some participation. Well, you guys all type or choose what to do. I'll introduce myself too. My name is Julian. I am last year in my bachelor's of arts and science. I'm in a cognitive science degree at McGill University as well, but I also work as a counselor for Kids Help Phone. If you call the line at any point, you'll speak with a professional counselor, and I'll be one of those who answers because I do have a lot of my specialty is crisis response outside of my studies as well in a variety of contexts. So that's a little bit about me. Absolutely. We'll give everybody a minute to, chat if you want to introduce yourselves in the chat. Or we got Anya actually, who has their hand raised. Anya, if you want to go ahead and share about yourself.
Hi, my name is Anya. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a McGill student in U0, so I'm undecided. But yeah, I came here because it's my second semester, and I really like to work and I really like doing the work, but I definitely could use some more strategies to learn how to take care of my mental health while I'm working and working towards like whatever I want to do in the future.
All right. Thanks so much for sharing, Anya. Easton, you're going to be next.
I'm wearing sunglasses right now because I'm recovering from a mild brain trauma. Yeah, my name's Easton. I graduated from biology and am now doing a diploma in environment. I'm also with a lab working on possibilities for graduate school. So I'm very thankful I kind of got those connections before no one could meet each other in person anymore. But I care a lot about mental health in education because I was kind of like very confused about why like some things weren't working for me since I started at McGill. And it wasn't until like the last year when I was coping with like a close family death that I was even thinking critically about my mental health for the first time. It's not really something that I thought like very specifically about. And I spoke with some friends about it, kind of connected some dots and asked with a therapist if like a certain kind of diagnostic test like would be worthwhile. And she was like, yeah, like go for it. And I find since then, even though it was like in my last year, I was like, when I was graduating, I was thinking, man, like, what if I knew this about myself in the beginning, and I guess knew why I was different from other people and in what way, and how to kind of optimize how I feel, how I take care of myself, how I approach all facets of my life instead of just trying to copy, like failing very much so, trying to copy what everyone else is doing. But I'm so thankful for having been able to, I guess, use the mental health resources at my disposal, which were both institutional and, I guess, social in terms of like volunteer work and support groups. That like I learned so much about myself in such a short span of time, and I find like I'm kind of like getting so much back from the world and life now that I know how to put my best feet forward. So that's how much I care about mental health and education. And I think people should be, I guess, taught enough about mental health that they can know what sorts of questions to ask. The way that I only knew to do this recently in my life. So thanks for hosting this.
And thank you for sharing also about yourself, Easton. It's really, it takes vulnerability to be able to talk about our story in a lot of ways. But it's also a really great bridge for creating connections with a lot of other people in ways that we might not ever anticipate. So, thank you for giving us that opportunity as well. I'll invite everybody to, if you want to keep on sharing at any point in the chat, you are more than welcome to do so. But Margaret, I think we're good to continue with the presentation.
Okay, so I did, here, I'll share my screen. Of course, now it's not showing. Oh, there it is. Is that working?
Good to go.
And thank you so much, Julian, and whoever else, I'm sorry, I can't remember, is monitoring the chat. Actually, I'm going to try to see if I can see the chat too, but how do I do that again in Zoom? I'm trying to remember. Well, anyway, I'll trust you folks to monitor the chat, and please bring anything up, any questions or thoughts that are coming from the chat, because I'm not able to see that right now. So I shared a little bit about myself and what I'm hoping we can chat about a bit today. As we know, for probably about a decade, there's been a ton of attention paid to this idea of a campus mental health crisis. And if anything, these concerns are probably only going to be exacerbated or are being exacerbated by their current situation in the pandemic. I think, as Easton pointed out in his story, just not being able to connect with people and you know, have those same kind of relational exchanges is very challenging. We're living more and more in this online environment. And anyway, that's a whole day to talk about that. But these kinds of challenges aren't going anywhere. And I would say traditionally, excuse me, frog in my throat. Traditionally, I worked as in student counseling at Queen's University when I was doing my graduate studies there as a counselor. And the idea was really that counseling support around mental illness and mental health was something separate from your experience as a student. I mean, you could access those services, you know, at university. And increasingly, when we ask students, like, what do we need, to, you know, to improve mental health on university campuses, often, you know, there is a discussion about more funding for counselors, you know, more time, you know, so that we could see them more quickly, that there would be more counselors available. And certainly that is a part of the solution. But there are many, many solutions and many opportunities. And what I want to focus on today is that academic part of that. So one of the first questions that I had for this group is, you know, have you thought about this, and what do you think the role is of academe or traditional academic kinds of environments for addressing the challenge of student mental illness? So I'm as happy for this to be, you know, I was hoping this part could be a little discussion oriented, but I don't know if anyone has any thoughts about this. Easton? I can't see everybody, so let me try to fix that. But go ahead.
What's jumped to my mind is the fact that I've heard so long about university being like, I guess, a marketplace of ideas from diverse people from many different backgrounds. Like, what could be a better environment to also learn about the many ways one can experience being a person and experience their mind and developing our mind with various paths that we're trying in life. So yeah, it seems like a convenient context to be learning about mental health.
Absolutely, and learning, period, right? I mean, it's a huge time for learning all kinds of things in your field, new social, personal growth experiences. It's such a learning time. So this could definitely be a part of it for sure. Any other thoughts on this? Yeah, go ahead.
There was a couple like teachers who individually, when they introduced their classes, they were like, well, just first of all, just remember health is number one, don't forget. And they gave like a list of resources. And like in a lot of the emails were sent, as students, we get a lot of like, don't forget to go to Student Wellness Hub and stuff like that. So I think that's definitely a step in the right direction in integrating mental health programs in with academia.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and there are lots of strategies. So that is one, like at the beginning of courses, taking a few moments even to address that, or addressing it at different times throughout the term. Absolutely. And some professors are kind of better at doing that than others. I'd like to see a time when that's just not normal practice. Okay, I'll go on to my next question. Okay, well, this kind of gets at that actually. So today we're going to talk about an actual standalone 4-credit course. But what are some other ideas that you folks might have about ways that we could embed mental health education into kind of the undergraduate experience, other than like counseling? Any other thoughts? Yeah.
There are big financial barriers to getting information on mental health. And so I think universities, I mean, there's the whole financial barrier of attending a university. but it's a good place to disseminate, sorry, mental health information in a way that's accessible to more people.
Yes, absolutely. And, you know, it is a time that there are services that are provided to all students. So it doesn't matter if you happen to have a job that has benefits so that you can access therapy, for example, which is tricky to access sometimes if you don't have extra benefits. So it is a time when you could access those sorts of things for sure. Great idea. What any other thoughts about ways? So, you know, we just talked about, well, it could be introduced at the beginning of class. Yeah, Easton?
Yeah, I'm just thinking of the many, I guess, resources that I didn't know existed when I started my studies. So, and I think this also ties with, I guess, finance and also mental health, in the sense that the more busy, so to speak, a person is, and that could be busy with work and being overwhelmed with things at home, or you know, mental health can have an impact on how much we're able
Oops, I
to
think.
kind of like have an open and emails that are telling us about services. Yeah, it's something I've wondered about, in what ways we can, and you guys mentioned a nice idea, like at the beginning of a semester, maybe in class, we can really, I guess, render services more, be more aware of what's available.
Yeah, so you were cutting in and out a little bit there, at least for me. Who knows? It could be on my end, but I think we got the gist, like, of some of what you were trying to share. So thank you. So there are lots of different ideas about ways that we can do this in terms of the climate of the university, you know, student support networks or peer support initiatives, you know, things in residence for students who are living on campus. You know, there's lots of different ideas. But what I've kind of, you know, focused on in part, you know, with the work that I've done is like the actual classroom. So what I noticed when I started to work in this area is that colleges tend to offer these kinds of self-development or mental health type courses more so than universities. So there tends to be this more of a transition from high school to university, in which, like, often many colleges offer for credit. And again, when you're really focused on, you know, it's been hard maybe to get into university, it's a financial sacrifice for you or your family, or it's really, you know, you could be very focused on your coursework. And many students are like that, not everybody, we know, but, you know, so if there's a way that some of this happens through a course or courses in your tenure as a university student, that might be more embedded in kind of one of your main focuses, which is on your coursework. But again, you know, there haven't been a lot of universities that have offered these kinds of courses.
Let me jump in. We do have a message from the chat I'd like to share with the group. One opinion is maybe having people, so peer mentors or counselors, at the residences when it's safe for first-year students specifically. That's another option that was brought up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a great idea. Now, I don't know a number of you that we did hear from were from McGill, and maybe there's some folks out here that are from other campuses as well. But, and oh, sorry, there was one other thing that Easton said that I wanted to latch onto, which is kind of awareness and knowledge. So one of the things I did on the university mental health framework is I chaired a committee. And basically what we found after doing all these surveys and other things was that, yeah, there are some really great initiatives at the University of Guelph, but students don't know about them. And it's almost by accident that they, you know, find out some of these things. They're not very well organized in a coherent way online or communicated in, you know, it's hard, it's all almost silos. Like there may be things, you know, through residence, or there may be things through student wellness, or so how to better integrate and communicate what is available is something that my university has been focusing on, and I think is starting to do a pretty good job at. Always room for improvement, but and I think also training, you know, faculty and staff and how to approach conversations around mental health. Like faculty are often at the front lines. They'll notice like that, a student maybe isn't doing so well, or maybe a student brings something to them, but they don't really know how to deal with it or where to refer them or how to support them or what the boundaries are, all of those things. So I think doing training in that area can help. But coming back to this course idea, let's say there were a course at McGill or another place where you happen to be that was focused on mental health. What do you see as kind of some of the pros and cons of having, accredited course that students would take in this area, regardless of their program of study? I think Lauren has her hand up.
Yeah, I think there is just such a wide variety of pros that I think everyone here can agree with. I think maybe the only con is that we would want to make sure that the people registering for this course would have the best intentions, right? So we wouldn't want people, I know definitely at McGill, there's a whole environment of taking bird courses and getting an A. I mean, I'm sure that's Anya could relate to that, or any first year, there's like a whole pressure of getting those A's once you enter university. So I just think that the con would be maybe not making it too easy, but also not making it a course where, it would affect students' mental health.
Yeah, for sure. And those are great points, Lauren. And it would depend. Oh, and Anya has her hand up.
And yeah, I think it'd be interesting to add to that, because if it was kind of like more of a mandatory, like I guess the reason is making it a 4-credit course kind of can have some cons in that, like, it'll mess with your schedule if you want to try and get prerequisites. So then you'll have less access to other courses you want to do. Also knowing that as first years, we also overstress about that. So that's also a thing. But if it was kind of, and also if it was more like a mandatory program, like there was a sexual abuse program that we were mandated to take at the beginning. I think it would be less stressful to think about it as part of our courses, and then it would be nicer to think about it as like, oh, it's something I also have to do, but it's not like graded, and it's not like it won't take away from other prerequisites that I might have to take.
Yeah, so those are really great points too. So some challenges thinking about like pros and cons, right, of this kind of idea. And also like, would this be an elective, that anyone could take? At the most extreme, would this be like a required course for students? Increasingly in elementary and secondary settings, we have embedded mental health curricula across the board, and we're moving more and more in that direction, which I think there's lots of great things about that, as long as there's a diversity of perspectives offered and a diversity of skills, because not all tools work the same way for different people from different backgrounds. At any rate, so we're hearing some kind of pros and cons about that. One of the, let's just play, put on a kind of imaginary hat for a moment that you were sitting in my shoes, because, about 7 years ago, I got asked to develop a course like this, and with some specific parameters, and I'll tell you more about that course. One thing I'll tell you right off the bat, which addresses some of the things that you're raising, is this course was actually envisioned as an extension in a way of our student accessibility services, in the sense that students would register for this course through their mental health advisor. So we have advisors, it's not really a counseling role, it's folks that support students who are identified with a mental illness experience, and that they need academic support at the university. So it's a particular, it's students that are already identifying with mental illness, and we already know there's a whole host of students who don't identify, and that are struggling through all kinds of things. But that was the particular mandate for this course, and I'll tell you more about the course in a minute. But forget about that. I want you to think about what kinds of topics do you think you would want to include? Let's say you were having to, design one of these courses. Clearly you all have some interest in mental health. So what kinds of topics would you want to include? Oops.
I'll go ahead and hop on here real quick. I can think of two off the top of my head, taking care of yourself and also how to take care of others safely. I think they're both kind of critical. The first, so that we can build something like independence, resilience, good habits on the long run. And the second, to also kind of create a sustainable community, a group of people who are there to support each other while taking care of themselves as well. We want more, I think, for a group to be like a fence where they're able to protect each other. Everybody kind of stands on their own, but joined together, rather than to be more like a house of cards where everybody's leaning on each other. Then if one thing falls, everybody falls with it.
Yeah, that's a great point, because honestly, over the years in teaching this course, and also, working pretty extensively in the past with youth who are at university and experiencing health challenges, obviously for many youth, like the social realm is very important. And what I've found is that certainly not all of those who experience mental health challenges, but many of them also are very they have strengths in the area of caring, connection, kindness, and therefore they tend to be a support for lots of others in their lives, and trying to figure out what those boundaries are for them. And I liked what you said, Julian, about how to support others safely for them, but also safely for yourself, because that's something that we see quite a bit too. Now, did someone else have their hand up?
I don't have anybody with their hand raised at the moment, but I do have some
Okay,
messages from the chat to share with the group.
sure.
So one idea that's out there is that we agree that required courses for first years is a good idea, kind of going back to the last point. Wellness and transition to college is important, and awareness of our own mental health, students' own mental health and wellness availability on campus is important too. Ethan also shared that in terms of topics, maybe self-care and how different personalities have different self-care needs, neurodiversity, and to look at personality pathology to understand behaviors that we might take for granted, but maybe a source of unhappiness in our lives.
Yeah, so those are all really good ideas, and they become more interesting when you think about how to put them into a course that will be evaluated. Just a spoiler for what's coming up about the course that I've been working on. It is evaluated, but it's like a practicum or an internship type course, in the sense that it's a pass-fail. It's a participation credit, basically. So you're not given, a mark of 85% on your kind of very applied work that you do. So it is a pass-fail, but nonetheless, you have to participate to get the credit. So, okay, so that's a good transition, actually. And just looking at our time, we're at a good spot in the in the talk. So now I wanted to share a little bit about our experience at Guelph with a course called Psych 1400 Mental Health and Wellbeing. And I've already said, basically, I was approached by the director of wellness at the time, Bruno Mancini, about some funds that were available through the ministry for mental health on campus. And basically, Guelph wanted, university spent this money in all kinds of different ways. But one of the ways that Guelph wanted to spend the money was this idea of a course. We had a course already for several years for students that were entering university with a learning disability. It's called Psych 1300. And in that course, students, were able to learn more about their learning disability, and also how to better advocate for themselves, and just try to set them on a good footing at the start of their university training or experience. So kind of Upward Min wanted to do something similar with mental health. And because of my research area and some of my involvement in advocacy around mental health on campus, and I guess my background, they approached me to work on this pilot project. So it was a really interesting project to be involved in, and still is, because it really was, remember I talked about silos at university, and any of you who do things on the campus know well what I mean by that. But this was a real collaboration between a very traditional academic department, psychology, and myself representing that, with our student accessibility services, and also more broadly student life, or student experience, it's called on some campus. Actually, it is now on ours. And a collaboration with all those folks. And I talked about that it's was modeled on the existing course. And the great thing about this is that I got to do this in a way where I really got to consult with lots of folks and talk to them about their ideas, just like we kind of did right now. I know it wasn't a fulsome discussion, but this, what would you do with this kind of course? What kind of topics would you cover? Should it be evaluated? How would students register for the course? You know, should that registration be controlled in some way? All kinds of questions and things that we looked at. And I thought it was really important to sit down with, you know, I'd already worked with quite a few student advocates in different kinds of ways on campus. So I thought it would be really important to sit down with them to say, like, you would be the, you know, the kind of folks who may take this course. So let's talk to you and see what you think about it. What kinds of topics would you want covered, or what are some issues we should think about? So
We have a
that led
message
to
from
doing,
the.
oh yeah, sure, go
Oh,
ahead.
yeah. Yeah, we're talking about how there's an individual who can relate. Uh, the individual doesn't exactly have a learning disability, but because they find it very difficult from other people, it took a long time how to study properly. Before university, they just listened in class and remembered everything by heart, but when they got to the university, it started to become too much. So,
Yeah. So, and that's a perfect example of that idea of transition. So sometimes like that transition between high school and university can be really exciting and wonderful, but for some students, and I count myself there, I mean, it was a very tough year for me for a variety of reasons. And it sounds like, you know, perhaps for this individual as well. I think Lauren has her hand up.
Yeah, just on that, I think that's super interesting because here in Quebec, we have CEGEP, which is
Mhm.
kind of that intermediary position between high school and university. And I think just for me personally, CEGEP was when I kind of got my butt kicked. And that really showed me when, like, how I should study and what I'm doing wrong in the way that I'm studying. So I think I was better prepared once I got to university. So it would be great if there was kind of that buffer that was offered to first year students in university coming from across Canada, like CEGEP kind of is for us.
Mhm. To make that transition to a new way of learning um, and beyond learning, also like caring for self, you know, different self-care strategies, different relations with family, whatever that looks like for you, um, or important people in your life, whatever that looks like, you know, lots of change and transition. So initially this was envisioned as a course for first year students. Um, but what we found is that the very first year we offered it, we ran it in the fall semester. And so it was students who hadn't even, you know, set foot on campus, many of them yet, and they were needing to make a decision about pre-registering in this course. So to maximize kind of the registration, we wanted about 35 students for our first offering. This was 6 years ago. We opened it up to upper year students as well. And then I taught it the first few years. And now I kind of supervise at arm's length some graduate students in clinical psych that teach. And I'm still involved in the course in other ways. But at any rate, we decided that it was actually nice to have a mix of kind of first year and upper year students. But I think there are pros and cons to that too. We probably don't have time to get into that too much, but definitely I'm hearing from lots that, you know, that first year can be very challenging. And what I heard actually when I ran these focus groups as well was from more senior students who said, you know, we've had some good support. Like these are students, many of them were involved with our student accessibility services. So, you know, they were aware of and identified their kind of mental health challenges and had been getting various supports, which is again, not representative of all students, but they were more concerned about leaving university and going into the workplace. Would there be accommodations for them? How would they access that? What would that look like? And the same kinds of things that some of you have raised about new ways to study or learn in this environment. There's another transition, you know, for many of you potentially coming up in terms of either graduate school or a work environment or different roles in your life. So that was something they thought should be integrated into the course as well. Also lots around like how to manage self-disclosure. You know, do I disclose to my professor that the kind of challenges that I have? Do I disclose in a workplace? You know, I distinctly recall a student with, you know, history of self-injury and, you know, was asked not to wear long sleeves to work, and that was an issue for the student. And, you know, trying to kind of problem solve about how do we manage these kinds of things in and outside of the university and learning context. Students also thought there should be an emphasis on, you know, awareness, knowing how to access supports, that there should be an emphasis on how to talk to your friends about these kinds of issues, your parents, professors, etc. Okay, so I'm not going to talk about this too much other than to say if anyone is looking at something like this in their site, I'm happy to advise on kind of the process that's involved. But needless to say, getting a university course approved doesn't happen overnight, and it's a bit of a process at every university. So when I asked myself that question, I asked you, like, what should we do with this course? I have to admit, I was biased. We all have our biases. But I kind of drank some Kool-Aid a long time ago about the importance of positive mental health and a focus on strengths and well-being and how for everybody that can be of benefit. And I think that's often also the case for sure for people who experience challenges with mental illness. So I wanted to bring that kind of focus into the course. And so I've been saying mental illness, mental health. You know, some of you doing lots of work in this area are going to know right away kind of, well, what's the difference, but just want to put it out there. So anyone want to talk about when we say mental illness or mental health, what are we talking about? Is it the same thing? How are they different? Anyone? Okay, I will, oh, there's Easton. Go ahead.
From the point of view of someone who's not in a mental health discipline, I can guess that mental illness might refer to, I guess, classes of illnesses that are identified by, I guess, mental health researchers and things that can be diagnosed. Whereas, like, I don't diagnose someone with a case of mental health. It's like mental health is maybe more of like a component of well-being that, you know, more or less everyone has in different dimensions. And we can talk about it, you know, almost the way that someone talks about different dimensions of like their nutrition. It's like, you know, how is this component of your mental health and how is that component of your mental health?
Yeah, so great ideas there. I think Lauren also, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. I was just going to say, in terms of mental health, what comes to mind is more of a system that is just as integral as, let's say, your nervous system or things like that, and is just as varied. And then in terms of mental illness, I'd say issues that are more chronic and that affect a part of your life for a period of time.
Right. And what I like about this period of time is that it gives the idea that both of these things can really vary, you know, over time. So, you know, and there are lots of ways to think about it. Here's you know, some definitions for you to look at. But often across different people, we often think about mental illness as those sort of patterns of behavior, levels of distress, suffering, impairment, that sort of thing. Whereas mental health is that broader kind of conceptualization, and it does tend to be more quote unquote positively oriented in the sense of like we can all grow our mental health or our vitality in different areas in our life, regardless of whether or not we may experience mental illness at different times, you know, more severely. Of course, that's going to impact our mental health, but there are ways that we can kind of fill our bucket, fill our well, however you want to think about it, and grow those aspects of mental health. That's just a definition there for you. And some of you who work in these areas may have also heard of Corey Key's model, which is used across all, you know, public health and all kinds of different areas. So I used Corey Key's model as a kind of an orienting framework for this course. And in fact, in the first lecture of the course, and I bring it up throughout the course, we talk about all coming from different experiences, and we may vary on that sort of x-axis or the dimension of mental illness symptoms. You know, there may be times we have flare-ups, we have a lot of symptoms of anxiety, depression, other kinds of challenges. And there may be other times in our life when those symptoms are lower, but the idea of a continuum, again, that gets back, I think, Easton Ray's idea of diagnosis. I'm not going to get into all of that, but you know, the idea that all human beings vary on these kind of challenging mental illness related things at different times in their lives. But the idea is, regardless of your level of mental illness symptoms at that time, you could be also working on another related but also different dimension, which is mental health. So for students taking my course who've all identified with a mental illness, and we'll learn more about them in a second, all of them, regardless of that, could be working on aspects of mental health. And whenever we turn to a more positive framework, there's always this risk of kind of, oh, here she comes, you know, Pollyanna, roses, sunshine, lollipops. And there's no getting around that life is really difficult as we sit here in the middle of almost a year of many of us being kind of at home, losing all kinds of things, you know, with this pandemic, but even before that, all the kinds of challenges of human living. It's very tough, and for some people, it's tougher than others. So lots of us are interested in how can we be more resilient as human beings. And what some of the research shows is that one of, you know, resilience is a complicated thing. It's a social, ecological, and individual kind of experience. But on an individual level, one of the things we can work on is kind of that strengths-based view of ourselves and a strengths-based view of others. So I think that people that experience suffering and challenge, including mental illness, that is very difficult, but there also are strengths that can come from those experiences. And what I wanted to do in this course is pay more attention to kind of the strengths that those students have and their abilities that they have, rather than seeing my students and myself, you know, through that more deficit-oriented lens. That's not to say that the kinds of mental illness experiences aren't very, very challenging and difficult in many ways, and it's not to take away from that, but it's just the emphasis of this course was more on how can we build these resources and resilience. Another sort of approach that I take in my research, but also in my clinical practice and in this course, is that of positive clinical psychology, that to really have this more complex, I mean, human beings are incredibly complex. So if we take a more medical model, deficit-oriented approach to being, I am someone who's experienced mental or you know, major depressive disorder, which is the following symptoms, like that doesn't really tell you much about me, Margaret Lumley, right? We need a holistic approach to really understand the person, including some of their challenges in that may be related to mental illness, but the whole person. So in this course, I really wanted to bring in, again, all kinds of things that would help to give these students a broader sense of themselves. Because sometimes when you are someone who experiences mental illness, you get used to seeing yourself through that lens as somebody who, you know, suffers with mental illness. And while that may be true, you are so much more than that, and we are all so much more than that. So that's part of the lens of the course. Okay, so we need like a, you know, a way to orient to that. If we go back to that Corey Key's model, fine, we want to build that dimension that's going, you know, mental health. Well, how do we go about doing that? What is that comprised of? And there's lots of theories and things that tell us about what that's comprised of. But one of the theories I used in this course is the Perma Model, Martin Seligman's Perma Model, so that these are different roadways to wellness or well-being. So having positive emotions, being engaged with life, having positive relationships. Meaning is a really big one. It's one that gets talked about a lot lately. How important it is to have things in our lives that are meaningful to us, and that might look different for all of us. Accomplishment, and that doesn't mean, as I'm speaking to McGill students, that doesn't mean getting a 99% necessarily in a course. It could mean that, but it can mean something like, you know, today I you know, cleaned up my closet and I accomplished that, or whatever. Like, it's just accomplishing some things in your life, even small things. I'm just conscious of the time. So we've got about 8 minutes. I don't know how hard stop this 3 o'clock is. I imagine it is because you've got other things going on. So I might skip this, just if you could reflect on that, thinking about, you know, because every campus culture is a bit different. So thinking about how would a course like this fit? And if you were interested in it, how might you advocate for this? And again, I'm happy to chat offline with anyone who's interested in doing more about that. So just really quickly, we got to offer a course. We've offered it now for 6 years. It is a smaller seminar type course, and there are pros and cons to that. I have been advocating from the beginning that the university offer a larger course that more students, not just those registered with a mental health challenge, would take. And we do have some courses a bit like that at Guelph. I told Julian about one when we met. But this is specifically, it's more of a community that forms around this kind of seminar type course. And there are advantages to that too. And we've been doing research on the course since the outset. So our goals for the course are here. And definitely we wanted to increase positive coping and decrease self-stigma. And also, you know, kind of meet some of those goals that we knew from our focus groups were important to students. So I'm going to put another question out there. I know we're low on time, but I mean, one of the things people asked me right from the beginning about this initiative, like, well, you have group therapies on your campus. Like, how is this different than a group therapy or other kind of mental health support? So any thoughts on that? It could include saying, no, I don't think it is different, but any ideas on how it might be different?
I'll include everybody here just so that we can try to work together at the same time to put your answers in the chat right away instead of saying them out loud so that we can kind of work through them that way.
Well, maybe we'll come back to that one in a second. So feel free to put something about that in the chat. How do you think it might be different than a group therapy? Because that was the thing I heard the most when I was developing this course. And these were some of the central goals. And there were assignments. There were small assignments every week, as well as a larger individual well-being plan. Individual learning and well-being plan. So that was like figuring out what you needed personally for you to help you be successful with your academics. You know, brings me back to the chat where someone mentioned something about learning in a different way, and with a learning disability that was challenging. So for your own academics, but also your broader self, like what would be some good strategies to take care of self, and for, you know, a plan when things may be going off the rails?
One comment on the last question about the difference between therapy and a course is that if it's a course, it feels like it's more part of the McGill community, like it's more integrated into that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'll give you some other quick things about how it's different. Well, it's evaluative, like you earn a credit. And again, so there is something, you know, to be said for that. Also, the level of self-disclosure is different than in therapy. So yes, there's self-disclosure, but we put a lot of guidance and support around appropriate self-disclosure. It's not a place to, it's a course, so it's not a place to like resolve really current distressing crises. And also because of the nature of the course and even what I've presented a little bit about you today, you can see that it's really focused on positive mental health, which doesn't mean some of these other things are going to come up. They do, but there is more emphasis on sort of that sort of aspect of well-being, as opposed to ameliorating your symptoms of mental illness. So that's another difference. And here's how, you know, the other questions I often get is like, well, how is this different from another class? So it is pass fail. You know, not all courses are like that, obviously. And although there is a bit of knowledge acquisition, i.e. learning stuff, there is certainly a big emphasis on self-development. So assignments might be something like learning about self-compassion and writing a compassionate letter to yourself, or learning about character strengths and doing a survey to learn about your top character strengths and making a plan of how you might use them more in your everyday life. And so students are told that they'll get the most out of it if they participate. And I touched on this a little bit. critiquing resources that are available. So all resources that are out there aren't necessarily super high quality. And all students also worked on, I am keeping my eye on the time, Julian, I know I've got 3 minutes. All students also worked on a final like cumulative project. So one student I remember presenting about, she had a service dog for her mental illness and presenting about that. And students who at the very beginning of the class thought, I would never do this, I will never present, many were able to, or we found ways to accommodate them. I'm going to skip ahead, but you guys have a copy of these. If you read through what students say about the course, it's quite powerful. So we've been researching it for years. This is just what the students look like in terms of their background, in terms of their mental illness experience. And also you can see that many had been hospitalized for their mental illness, for taking medication or seeing a mental health professional. And just really quickly, like we have lots of outcome data, but showing really positive effects in terms of increased resilience, decreased depression, and more positive coping, self-concept, reduction in internalized stigma, like stigma about self. And these are the outcomes in their own words, which I hate to just gloss over, but hopefully you have a chance to look at them if you're interested. I mean, I think for the majority of students, it has been a pretty powerful experience. I feel more comfortable saying that when I'm not teaching it directly. I did teach it the first 2 years, but I'm supervising at arm's length. So I will say it's been a very powerful experience for a lot of students. There are challenges like attendance, and it's really interesting. So I'm going to end with, I know I've got to wrap up here, but when we're offering it online, of course, this winter, right now, like everything. And I think we were really worried about it in some ways, and we'll see how it goes. But I think, we want to check in with the students, because so far it seems like it's working well, and it's actually working better for attendance. I think for students, they can, if they are struggling with mental illness, like getting to campus can be really challenging. So popping online may be okay for them. So we're just, sorting some of that out. But, my take-home message is that I think there are lots of things that we are doing pretty well, and lots of ways that we can improve how we address the mental illness challenge or mental health opportunities for students on campus. And I think a central part of what universities do well is figure out how to offer courses. And I think that we could have more courses available for students to take on this important topic. And I'll finish there. Phew.
And thank you so much. I think, we can all agree that there's a lot that we can learn, that we want to learn, and that on some level we also should learn when it comes to attending university and an institution that's meant to not just prepare us for the workforce, but in many ways also is formative for how we approach life afterwards.
Absolutely.
So I will invite everybody to join the next session that I'm going to send the link for in the chat. But before I do, Margaret, let me ask you, if people do want to get in touch with you to talk more about ideas, if they're trying to do stuff, on their own that's similar to what you guys are doing at U of Guelph, what's the best way to reach out to you?
Just my email, which, sorry, it's on the screen here, but it's mlumley@uoguelph.ca.
Amazing. So we'll be sure to share this email address with you guys in a follow-up email to you specifically, since you're able to attend. You can also, we'll also be sending you the slides directly by email for attending. Thank you so much. In the chat now, you have the chill zone, which is a place that if you want to take a break for a little while before going anywhere else, there's some activities going on there, or some active listeners to be able to debrief as well. In the meanwhile, here is the Unpacking the Baggage in a Mental Health Pandemic. Your Zoom link is here, and if you guys want to hop on there, I think we are getting started as well. So you guys are more than free to head off. Thank you so much again for attending, and enjoy the rest of your day, everybody. Margaret, if you want to stick around a bit, we can also chat afterwards.
Oh, sure.